Introduction to Emerging Literature is an integration of a traditional and technological-driven form of literature. The 5 R's of creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction pioneer Lee Gutkai developed a very system called the 5 R's of creative nonfiction writing. Together, the 5 R's form a general framework for any creative writing project. This includes first, the real life. A creative nonfiction has a real life. When you write about real life, remember that you are writing about real life, real places, and real events. Visiting the people and places you are going to write about will give you the tools necessary to tell an accurate, strong with vivid scenery, well-described artifacts, and true-to-life personages. Nothing should be fictional or made up. The second is reflection. A creative nonfiction is based on the writer engaging in personal reflection about what he or she is writing about. It includes personal reflection. You, the author, are the human connection between the subject matter and the reader. In this sense, creative nonfiction relies much more on the personality of the author than fiction. You must befriend your reader and make them trust you and proceed your storytelling. The third one is research. A creative nonfiction requires that the writer complete research. You should conduct extensive research. Use every resource available to you and to gather information on your subject. Of course, when you look for your information, that will depend the subject matter, but some great starting places are, for example, in the library, in newspapers, newspaper archives, or an interview. The fourth one is reading. Learn by reading. The creative nonfiction writer should read autobiographies, newspapers, magazines, and also articles and other nonfiction books to get a taste for how theirs should be formatted and written. The final element of creative nonfiction is writing. Write a narrative. You should write a narrative. Use the storytelling elements of fiction to create a compelling story with a factual information you have gathered. The next is the types of creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction is about fact and truth. The truth can be about a personal experience, events, or issue in the public eye. So these are the list of the most types of creative nonfiction. First, personal essay. Personal essay, these are the stories about personal experiences, and while some personal essays can be standalone stories about a single event, and the writers here uses the first person I. Second is memoir. It contains personal experience of the narrator. It could include many scenes of a place or an encounter with a person, and also the writer composes the story using the person also I. And the third is literary journalism essay. Literary journalism include also interview and book reviews. The narrator tries to maintain an objective, impartial stand. So another important aspect of literary journalism is that it often stretches the idea of objective facts in order to better reflect real life and real people. In other words, while journalism is about being completely objective, literary journalism says that people can't be objective because they already have their own subjective views about the world. Therefore, by taking objectiveness out of the journalistic process, the writer is being more truthful. The fourth one is autobiographies. Autobiographies are the life story or history of a person's life written by that person. So this is the first person point of view and usually book length. It also includes journals, diaries, letters, and also memoirs. And the fifth is travel writing. This is the writer crafts articles or essays about travel using literary device. So, records the experience of travelers in some interesting places and circumstances. It includes vivid descriptions, illustrations, historical background, and possibly maps and diagrams. And in this article, you should describe the place's great detail. You can create a picture of a place where you are by using very descriptive, imaginative language. And the sixth is food writing. So, food writing, the writer crafts stories about food and cuisine using literary devices. It focuses on communicating information about food, no? So, it lets reader experience the relationship of food to man, also to nature and culture and even the tradition. Like for example, how to cook a wolf by Pictures and also Memoirs of Sardines Lover by Patrick Juliet. This book ties life with happening experiences with food. And the seventh is profiles. The writer constructs biographies or essays on real people using literary device. Also, the writer conveys an interpretation or perspective, and it introduces unusual professions, hobbies, and also personalities. In writing profile, know first the subject, their personality, and interests. Then, research other information about the person and choose a theme that suits your subject. You can also interview the person and the people surrounding him or her. The next is the guidelines for writing creative nonfiction. First, research the topic. Both primary, like interviews, personal experience, or participant observation, and also secondary research, like books, magazines, newspapers, or a web. You should research your topic. Second is never invent or change facts. Uninvented facts is an invented story rather is a fiction. The third is provide accurate information. Write honestly and truthfully. Information should be verifiable. The fourth is provide concrete evidence. This you should use facts, examples, and quotations. And number five, use humor to make an important point. Yes, you should make a humor to make your work an important point. Number six is use the reader what happened. Show the reader what happened. Don't tell them what happened. So don't tell them what happened. And to do this, you can dramatize the story. And the seven is narrate the story. A story has an inciting incident and also has a goal, a conflict, challenges, obstacles, climax, and resolution. 8 is write about the interesting and extraordinary. Write about personal experiences, interesting people, extraordinary events, or you can provide a unique perspective on everyday life. Number 9, organize the information. You can use the common techniques such as chronological or logical order. 10, use literary devices to tell the story. Choose language that stimulates and entertain the reader, such as simile, metaphor, imagery, and so on. 11, introduce the essay or other work with a hook. Its purpose is to grab the reader's attention and compel them to read further. Popular hooks include a quotation, a question, or thought-provoking fact. 12, the last one is end the creative nonfiction piece with a final important point. So otherwise, the reader will think, so what? What was the point? It was an interesting story, but how does it apply to me or my life? So you should end the story with a clear information, no? Not like just a fiction like a movies na madaming mga bitin na pangyayari. Kasi may ano pa pala, may mga part 2, kaya 'di ba napapansin niyo may mga ganun. Okay, the next is hyper poetry. So what is hyper poetry? A hyper poetry is a poetry that is available on a web page and which take advantage of hyper link. This is a digital poetry that uses links using hypertext markup. Also, it can either involve set words, phrases, and lines that are presented in variable order but sit on the page much as traditional poetry does, or it can contain parts of the poem that more or mutate. It is usually found online. And hypertext poetry is a subgenre of digital poetry. And digital poetry is sometimes referred to as e-poetry, electronic poetry, and cyber poetry. The genre mostly falls into two subgenres: interactive poetry and hypertext poetry. This interactive poetry, kung nakita nyo na to or na-try nyo na to, kasi na-try ko minsan, para siyang, isa siyang poetry, tapos, yung writer niya, sinulat niya lang niya yung isang paragraph, tapos kung sino yung gustong magdugtong nun, pwede mo siyang dugtungan. Yun yung interactive poetry. Pwede mo siyang dugtungan kahit anong gusto mong idugtong, basta related siya doon sa topic na ginawa ng writer. Yan ang interactive poetry. And hypertext, notice that hypertext is different with the hyperlinks because hypertext involves only text while hyperlink involves text, media, audio, video, images, and also graphics. And hypertext is a text which contains links to other text and also connected by hyperlinks which are activated upon clicking or tapping of a mouse. And when you hover over a hypertext, it activates the hyperlink that redirects you to access additional information on other web pages. And so these are the examples of hyper poetry. As you can see, there is a link. Tapos kung pipindutin mo yan, makikita mo yung nandoon yung mga poetry. Tapos makikita mo kung may mga links na naman, tapos doon na naman yung mga karugtong. The next is the elements of hyper poetry. So the first element is kairos. Kairos means taking advantage of or even creating a perfect moment to deliver a particular message. Consider, for example, Dr. Martin Luther, his famous speech, "I have a dream," as you can see an example. Uh, the speech was rhetorically powerful. It changed minds, persuaded people to support the civil rights movements, and served as a powerful rallying cry for a generation of reformers. But the speech was so powerful in part because of its kairotic moment. Since rhetoric is about communication, you have to think about your audience, what they bring to the table, and how they think about the issue, and how they are likely to respond to your message. And number two, the audience also plays an interactive role in the navigating and reading a hypertext poem. And a content um, In content, hypertext poems can include the traditional components of a poem, which are words, lines, and also stanzas, and also formal features. And the last is ancestral genres. This is one ancestral genres to hypertext poetry is the hypertext. And these are the notable example of hypertext poetry. The penetration and also the low probability of raccoons. Penetration is a well-known example of an hypertext poem. This poem is from a collection, The Seasons, which was published in 2000 by Eastgate. Kung nakikita nyo yung tawag dito, yung example sa gilid, may mga words yan, pipindutin nyo yan, pupunta kayo sa mga words niyan, isa-isahin nyo pindot. May mga hypertext yan. And the second is low probability of raccoons. This is a website set by Peter Howard, a well-known digital poet. And the next is check literature or checklit. So, check literature is, it consists of heroine-centered narratives that focus on the trials and tribulations of their individual protagonists. It often addresses modern womanhood, from romantic relationship to female friendships, in humorous and light-hearted ways. So these are the examples sa mga babae, sa mga works na to, sa mga books na to, mga babae yung laman. And the next is the certain elements of chicklet novels that have in common. So they all features a woman in her 20s or 30s as a protagonist. And also the novels are mostly set in urban environments, most notably in New York or London. The protagonists are career women. Like what I've said, the protagonists are a woman. The protagonists also are often single, although they usually end up with someone. Also, fashion often plays a big role in a chicklet novels, and the book covers often reflect this trend. They may feature articles of clothing, martinis, parties, and other symbols of a glamorous lifestyles. Like for the example here, and the next is illustrated novels. So, what are illustrated novels called? Illustrated novels called, these are the story through text and illustrated images. Also, it is a graphic novel, a novel that tells a complete story via illustrations, and it contains a beginning, a middle, and end. So, illustrated novel, the first is the panel. A panel is a distinct segment of a comic containing images and text. Then next is the frame, the line that borders that contain the panels. So have you seen a graphic novel? So may panel, may frame, gutter, bleed, captions, speech balloon, external dialogue, internal dialogue, speech effect lettering, closure, and long shot, extreme long shot, close up, extreme close up, splash page, splash panel, palette, imanata, spread, inset, sped lines, reverse, signs, and also the voice over. So alam naman natin tong voice over. And here is the example. So this is the frame and layout. And that's all my report. Thank you and God bless.